Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another AP World History Modern AMSCO Read Aloud, a textbook made by McCormick, with your favorite host, Mono Entertainment. Where today I hope you all get saddled in with your favorite snack, drink, and notes, and get ready to take them as we read today's chapter, 5.3, Industrial Revolution Begins. Quote, "One man draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds it at the top for receiving the head. And the important business of making a pin is, in this manner, divided into about 18 distinct operations." Stated by Adam Smith from The Wealth of Nations, produced in 1776. Essential question. What factors contributed to and characterized industrialization in the period from 1750 to 1900? In addition to new ideas, new technologies were reshaping societies. These technologies led to a dramatic change in society and economies. This change was so dramatic that it was called the Industrial Revolution. The rigid structure of early factory work, described by Adam Smith, Scottish economist and philosopher, is one of the most enduring images of the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization, the increased mechanization of production, and the social changes that accompanied this shift had their roots in several influences. Among these were the Columbian Exchange and rise of maritime trading empires, which increased agricultural productivity and greater individual accumulation of capital. As the Industrial Revolution spread from Great Britain to Europe and North America, and then to the world, it reshaped society, increasing world population, shifting people from farm to city, and expanding the production and consumption of goods. Agricultural improvements. Just before the Industrial Revolution, in the early 1700s, an agricultural revolution resulted in increased productivity. Crop rotation, the rotation of different crops in and out of a field each year, and the seed drill, a device that efficiently placed seeds in a designated spot in the ground, both increased food production, and also the introduction of the potato from South America contributed more calories to people's diets. As nations industrialized, their populations grew because more food was available to more people. And because of improved medical care, infant mortality rates declined and people lived longer. With these demographic changes, more people were available to work in factories and to provide a market for manufactured goods. Pre-industrial societies. During the early 18th century, most British families lived in rural areas, grew most of their food, and made most of their clothing. For centuries, wool and flax had been raised domestically, and people spun fabrics they needed. However, one result of the commercial revolution and the establishment of maritime empires, cough cough, see topic 4.5, cough cough, was that Indian cotton became available in Britain, and before long it was in high demand. Wool and flax could not be produced quickly enough or in a large enough quantity to compete with cotton imports. To compete with Indian cotton, investors in Britain began to build their nation's own cotton cloth industry. Using imported raw cotton produced by slave labor in the Americas, the British developed the cottage industry system, also known as the putting out system, in which merchants provided raw cotton to women who spun it into finished cloth in their own homes. Home spinning was hard work, and pay was low, but cottage industries gave women weavers some independence. While working in their own homes, they were also close to children. But cottage industry production was slow. Investors demanded faster production, spurring the development of technologies and machinery that turned out cloth in more efficient ways. Growth of technology. By the mid-18th century, mid-1700s, the spinning jenny and the water frame reduced the time needed to spin yarn and weave cloth. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves in the 1760s, allowed a weaver to spin more than one thread at a time. The water frame, patented by Richard Arkwright in 1769, used water power to drive the spinning wheel. The water frame was more efficient than a single person's labor, and this mechanization doomed the household textile cottage industry. As textile production was moved to factories big enough to house these bulky machines, Arkwright was thus considered the father of the factory system. The interchangeable parts. In 1798, inventor Eli Whitney created a system of interchangeable parts for manufactured firearms for the United States military. In Whitney's system, if a particular component of a machine were to break, the broken component could easily be replaced with a new identical component. Entrepreneurs adapted this method of making firearms to the manufacture of other products. The system of interchangeable parts was pivotal contribution to industrial technology. Whitney's system directly led to the division of labor. Factory owners no longer had to rely on skilled laborers to craft every component of a part. Instead, with specialization of labor, each worker could focus on one type of task. For example, one worker might cast a part, then another worker would install the part on the finished product. In the early 20th century, 1900, Henry Ford expanded the concept of the division of labor, developing the moving assembly line to manufacture his Model T automobiles. And as we can see on page 299, we also can see the growth of British cities circa 1800, where at the top we see the dots are growing cities, and we can also see that in this weird sort of dotted gray pattern, we can see the coal fields as well. Looking at the map, we current on page 299, we can also see that between the Irish Sea, the North Sea, in the English Canal, and the island of England and Wales, connecting to Scotland, you can see the numerous growing cities, including Glasgow, Edinburgh in Scotland, along with the glass fields on this border up here, up to the north, the Newcastle coal fields as well, and also in Wales, we also have Cardill as well, as a growing city with only a small amount of coal fields. However, towards the center of the map, around Manchester, Sheffield, Birmingham, and Bristol are the main locations of coal fields on the map, located in the center of this diagram. However, moving forth, we have Britain's industrial advantages. Britain had many environmental and geographic advantages that made it a leader in industrialization. Located on the Atlantic Ocean with its many seaways, the country was well placed to import raw materials and export finished goods. Mineral resources. Britain also had the geographic luck of being located atop immense coal deposits. Coal was vital to industrialization because, when burned, it could power the steam engine. The burning of this fossil fuel, an energy source derived from plant and animal remains, was also essential in the process of separating iron from its ore. Iron production, and later steel production, allowed the building of larger bridges, taller buildings, and stronger ships. Coal mining became the major industry of northern and western Britain, including South Wales, Yorkshire, and Lancashire. When the United States industrialized, coal mining areas developed in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. Resources from the colonies. As a colonizing power, Britain also had access to resources available in its colonies, including timber for ships, largely because of the wealth they accumulated during the transatlantic slave trade. Enough British capitalists had excess capital, or money available to invest in businesses. Without this capital, private entrepreneurs could not have created new commercial ventures. Abundant rivers. Britain, the northeastern United States, and other regions also had a natural network of rivers supplemented by publicly funded canals and harbors. These water routes made transport of raw materials and finished products inexpensive. Strong fleets. Britain also had the world's strongest fleet of ships, including naval ships for defense and commercial ships for trade. These ships brought agricultural products to Britain to be used to make finished products for consumers. Protection of private property. A vital factor that aided industrialization in Britain was the legal protection of private property. Entrepreneurs needed the assurance that the business they created and built up would not be taken away, either by other business people or by the government. Not all nations offered these legal guarantees. Growing population and urbanization. The increases in agricultural production caused two shifts in society. As farmers grew more food, they could support more people. As they grew it more efficiently, society needed a smaller percentage of the population working in agriculture. This growing population in rural areas did not remain there. Migration was sometimes the best of bad options. English towns had traditionally allowed farmers to cultivate land or tend sheep on government property known as the commons. However, this custom ended with the enclosure movement, as the government fenced off the commons to give exclusive use of it to people who paid for the privilege or purchased the land. Many farmers became landless and destitute. The enclosure movement was thus instrumental in a wave of demographic change, forcing small farmers to move from rural areas to urban areas such as Manchester and Liverpool. The people who moved then became the workforce for the new and growing industries. Then, on page 300, we have key terms by theme. Technology, textiles. Spinning jenny. Water frame. James Hargreaves. Richard Arkwright. Factory system. Technology, agriculture. Agricultural revolution. Crop rotation. Seed drill. Economy, manufacturing. Industrial revolution. Industrialization. Cottage industry. Eli Whitney. Interchangeable parts. Division of labor. Specialization of labor. Assembly line. Enclosure movement. Capital. Environment, Britain. Seaways. Raw materials. Manchester. Liverpool. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes today's reading. Now let's get right on into the recap and review of what we just went over. So, naturally, looking at the quote and seeing as it relates to the textbook, chapter 5.3, we now see here that one man draws out the wire, and another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, and a fifth grinds at the top for receiving the head. Now, this quote from Adam Smith from The Wealth of Nations, made in 1776, also covered in a previous video and previous chapter, likely in the playlist if you are reading it from the AP chapter playlists, which I totally recommend, considering that way you can go in order and review every single one of the chapters in order without having to pause. Meanwhile, at the same venue, we also see that this quote relates to the concept of the different forms of labor and the division of that labor, as talked about earlier in the chapter. After all, as Adam Smith puts it, this is basically the part of an 18-step process, where individuals would have to work and work and work on different forms of specialization of labor, all working together, well, independently so, to produce an individual part. Later we also see things such as crop rotation, which basically is saying moving from point A to point B to point C and point D on a graph. For example, if you are looking at a graph, let's say putting it into quadrant 1, you are putting it and moving a crop from the first quadrant to the next quadrant, or from to the left and 500 feet to your left to 500 feet to your right, and rotating the crops so they can grow in new parts of the fields. So that way they can all take turns in enriching the soil, taking different nutrients, and doing a bunch of other things as well that can help the crops ultimately grow. The seed drill is also something common you may see, seeing as it's basically a giant drill that goes into the ground, spins, and more or less digs a hole just so farmers can put in seeds. Very simple, very easy to understand. And then going into, let's say, the cotton industry, the spinning jenny and the water frame, very important. The water frame, basically, think of a water wheel you would traditionally see. The spinning jenny, think of basically a weird spinning device used for spinning cloth. Nothing like a loom, but more or less like an automated version of a loom that looks very weird. James Hargreaves, of course, also very important as well, as he's the guy that invented the spinning jenny. Water frame, Richard Arkwright, also important to know. And then the biggest part of all, the biggest player, is 1798's very own Eli Whitney with the interchangeable parts. The interchangeable parts system actually is still in use and effective to this day. After all, if your console breaks or if your items break, or let's say you need to replace batteries, you can thank Eli Whitney, because otherwise somehow someone else would have thought of it, but it probably wouldn't have been for another 500 years or like 50 years. Then division of labor, specialization of labor, and then the assembly line. Now these are really important to know, especially when it comes to manufacturing. But division of labor is basically saying, let's say you're making a hammer, one person has to make the head of the hammer, another person has to make the handle of that hammer, and then another person has to put them together. Think of it like that. And then also here's the graph we showed off earlier on page 299. Keep it in mind if you want. And then also important is Britain was a very big player. They were a world power during the 1800s and 1700s. But that also came to a close after World War I, where that did change a bit, but they were still very strong. Remember, they had rivers. They were an island and had a lot of rivers. They had a good navy. They had a lot of production. And then farming, very important. Because this, as a matter of fact, the movement of forcing some farmers off land would also cause famines in some areas and also would lead to some issues as well. But, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude today's reading of the World History Modern AP Edition AMSCO textbook by McCormick, where today we are also going to finish off that reading, and also we're going to continue on with the next reading in the playlist. If you enjoyed reading this, or if you enjoyed listening to me reading it, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you consider supporting the channel. You can do that by becoming a member, liking the video, subscribing, or hitting the notification bell to stay up to date, and listening for when I post more content. If you have any suggestions, or if you have any requests, please feel free to email me or send me a message through social media. Or if you want to go see any of my other works on Twitch, please go right ahead. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'll leave the advert for the next part of this playlist. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, and make sure to stay safe, stay happy, and most importantly, stay entertained. Thank you.